Hello, this is Matt Racine, the author of Bar Exam Mind, a strategy guide for an anxiety-free bar exam, and chief window washer over at barexammind.com. And this is the fourth Bar Exam Mind podcast. In this episode of the podcast, I thought I would talk about some ways to memorize material. Now, some of these ways will probably seem obvious, and some may seem less obvious. And I wanted to give you all some tools for memorizing material because that is a huge part of succeeding on the bar exam. Now, the first way to memorize material is to organize the material. The classic way for law students and bar exam students to do this is by using an outline. I was no exception to this, and I used outlines both times I took the bar exam. In fact, you can go to my website and you can get copies of my Oregon bar exam outlines and my California bar exam outlines for free. Just click on the outlines tab and they're available in PDF form. I personally like the outline form. I think it allows you to group issues together in a nice linear format, and that linear format makes sense to me. Also with outlines, you can, once you realize that certain subjects tend to be tested together, such as negligence and strict liability, maybe fruit of the poisonous tree, legal search and seizure, and Miranda warning topics will tend to be tested together. And you'll start noticing when you're practicing your essays that various topics tend to come up together. And when you notice this, you can go through your outlines and cut and paste those chunks of information into a single outline and call it, an issue grouping or an issue pairing. And then you can review those in addition to your larger outlines. Outlines are also helpful because as you go through your studies, and you probably did this for your law school exams, as you go through your studies, you can begin to narrow your outline down to a more and more skeletal form. By the time the bar exam rolled around, I tended to have my topics down to a 2 to 3 page outline that would probably make no sense to someone else. But having studied the bar topics for the last 2.5 months, all I needed to see was the topic word and it would key all the issues for me. Now, if you can do that, it shows that you've memorized the information. If you're not someone who likes an outline, why don't you try a mind map or a flowchart, kind of an if this, then that. If offer, then is there acceptance? If acceptance, then is there repudiation? If no repudiation, is there a defense to performance? You get a flowchart going for how to analyze various issues. In fact, even if you are an outline person, flowcharts for some of the more complex issues can really help break it down for you in a visual format. And sometimes learning visually is the best way, especially for something complicated. If you've ever learned to play a sport, you could read the rule book, but nothing compares to actually playing the sport to solidify those rules in your mind. And that's kind of what organizing information in a more visual format like a flowchart will help you do with memorization. Another obvious and classic way to do memorization is with flashcards. I use flashcards myself. I did not use pre-made flashcards. I used flashcards that I wrote as I was studying. The way I made flashcards was after I had my outlines in an essentially complete form. As I would go through and study that outline, any of the issues that seemed especially difficult for me to remember, I would turn that into a flashcard. So, for instance, if I was having trouble remembering the elements of a particular tort, I would make that into a flashcard. The name of the tort on the front and then the elements on the back. I tended to make very simple flashcards. No flashcards with a treatise on intent or a treatise on justiciability, but rather just the simple tests. I left the putting of the puzzle pieces together for practice essays and practice MBE questions. If you do choose to use pre-made flashcards, make sure that they are flashcards that work with your mentality. Don't be afraid to buy flashcards and return them, because the worst thing you can do is, spend $70 on a set of flashcards and realize they're absolutely useless to you. The third sort of obvious way to memorize things is to practice them. I mentioned earlier playing sports is a great way to learn the rules of the sport, and that really is what writing practice essays, doing practice MBE questions is all about. You're trying to put the rules into practice. Sometimes you will succeed very well, and other times you will fall flat on your face, especially near the beginning of your bar prep. That's okay, keep practicing. And as you go through the practice, the act of either writing out the elements for a test or a cause of action or a tort will help solidify that in your mind. Also with the MBE questions, you're going to have to recall various tests and elements to your mind as you analyze the question. And this practical use of the information will help solidify it in your memory banks. Now, a couple of maybe less obvious ways to memorize things. First is you can read your outlines or flashcards or mind maps, whatever you've chosen to do. You can sit and read those out loud to yourself. This will effectively replicate a bar prep lecture, but instead of sitting passively and listening to the lecture, you are now essentially actively lecturing to yourself. So you're engaging different parts of your brain. You're engaging your speaking part, you're engaging your listening part, and you can't really talk and read your outlines and say them out loud if you're distracted by something else, like checking your Facebook or staring at someone in class or thinking about something you need to do in a couple of hours. So that helps engage the mind very well with the material. Another way to memorize, which takes a little more effort but I think is extremely effective, and it's a method I used during law school and for some areas of the bar, that is, you read either your entire outline or portions that you're having difficulty learning. You read those into a digital recording device, either a computer or if you happen to have a handheld digital recorder, or maybe even have a old style cassette tape recorder. So you read into the recording device and then you listen to those recordings at some other time. Maybe you listen to it right before you go to bed, maybe you listen to it while you're exercising, whatever. But again, this I think engages your mind in ways that listening to a lecture or merely reading something to yourself does not. First of all, you had to read it out loud to yourself once as you were recording it. And secondly, you're listening to your own voice say the information back to you. And so, since your own voice has a particular rhythm, it has a particular sound, and whether or not you like your voice or find it annoying or peculiar, as our voices tend to sound different when they're recorded, your brain, is saying, hey, that's my voice, this must be important, I should listen to myself. And so that's a really good way to learn particular areas that you're having trouble with memorizing for the bar exam. Well, I hope that this podcast was at least of some interest to you and that you could take something away of use. If you enjoyed the podcast, I'd love it if you would leave a comment on iTunes or in the show notes as to what helped you, because like everybody, I like getting positive feedback. If you have some suggestions for how to improve the podcast or have a question you'd like me to answer, please either leave that in the show notes page or go to barexammind/contact and you can contact me that way. Also, be sure to connect with me on Twitter at barexammind and also on the Bar Exam Mind Facebook page, which is facebook.com/barexammind. Thank you for listening and good luck on the bar exam.